Shaquille Big Shaq O'Neal walked into a historic Southern hotel and got turned away at the door. Trevor Langston, the polished white manager, saw a hoodie, not the hidden owner. What he didn't see were the cameras, the witnesses, or the storm that was coming. Shaq said nothing that day, but he didn't walk away. He walked deeper, because sometimes the quietest man in the room owns the whole damn building. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. There was something disarming about the way Shaquille Big Shaq O'Neal moved through the world. Not because of his size, that came with the territory, but because of his quiet, the kind of quiet that didn't demand attention, yet turned heads. In a world obsessed with noise, Shaq had mastered the power of presence. He didn't talk too much. He didn't need to. People who knew. In Savannah, Georgia, the summer heat pressed heavy against the streets, making the air thick with humidity and history. The old town buzzed with charm, moss-draped oaks, creaking streetcars, and buildings that whispered stories from a different time. But even in its beauty, Savannah carried scars, the kind buried in bricks, preserved in politeness, and passed through generations. Shaq's arrival was unannounced, as always. No limos, no handlers, just him, in a slate-gray hoodie, jeans, and worn sneakers that had walked more ground than most knew. The sun caught the edge of his chain, a simple pendant with LO engraved on it. Lucille O'Neal, his mother, his compass. He'd landed in Savannah under the radar. Private jet, private hangar, a black SUV waiting but not flashy. He drove himself. He liked it that way. Independence grounded him, reminded him of his roots, of nights when he and Lucille barely had a working heater, of meals stretched thin, of listening to his mother hum old gospel hymns as she swept floors at the community center. That memory never faded. Now, decades and billions later, Shaq had become the kind of man he promised her he'd be. Wealthy, yes, but useful. And there was no place he wanted to use that usefulness more than in places that had forgotten people like him. The hotel sat nestled in Savannah's historic quarter, a grand white structure with Greek columns and a red carpet rolled out with care. The Westbridge Hotel, a name that meant something in old circles. Once the playground of Southern aristocracy, it had been handed down from legacy owners, only recently sold in secret. And that's where Shaq came in. He owned it. Now. Quietly. Through a shell company, Northbridge Equity, formed specifically to take over hotels with problematic histories. But unlike most investors who bought for profit, Shaq bought for restoration, not just of buildings, but of dignity. He parked 3 blocks away, opting to walk the cobbled streets. Locals nodded. A few recognized him, but hesitated, not quite sure if it was really him. He smiled gently, touched the brim of his cap, and kept moving. One woman called out, "You help out Miss Dora last week?" He turned, shrugged modestly, and said, "She needed a ramp, seemed right." Then walked off. Shaq's path through life wasn't paved with press releases. He didn't need applause. His joy came from knowing a mother could wheel her son into her own home now. That a barber shop got rebuilt after a fire. That the teen who cleaned tables part-time just got a full scholarship, and didn't know why. He liked moving in the shadows, watching the world unfold without the filter of fame. As he neared the hotel, he slowed, observing everything. The doorman stiffly rehearsing greetings, the bellhop sneaking a smoke behind the fountain, the concierge tapping angrily at a cracked phone screen. Then the man at the top of the steps, white, mid-40s, sharp navy suit, eyes squinting like he was always judging. He straightened his tie, sniffed as if detecting unwelcome scent in the air. That was Trevor Langston. Shaq had read the file. Trevor had been managing Westbridge for 5 years. On paper, his record was immaculate. Profits up. Reviews decent. Staff retention, spotty. But paper doesn't hold tone. Doesn't show patterns. Like how only one black employee had ever been promoted beyond floor staff in 5 years. Or how complaints never reached HR. Or how the hotel had 5 different policy dress codes depending on who asked. Shaq climbed the stairs, heart steady, not angry, just awake. Trevor looked him over quickly. Hoodie, jeans, no suitcase, no reservation. "Can I help you, sir?" The voice polite, but sharp around the edges. "I was hoping to check the place out. Heard good things," Shaq replied casually. "We don't allow walk-ins without a reservation. Full occupancy." A lot. Shaq tilted his head, eyes calmly scanning the lobby behind Trevor's shoulder. Even for a quick tour, we're very selective about who we let in, unannounced. There it was. Not just rejection, dismissal, not spoken, but draped across the words like a silk sheet of superiority. Shaq just nodded, slow and silent. He stepped back, eyes lingering on the marble floor inside, then back to Trevor. Appreciate it, he said, and turned. He walked away without confrontation. No big declarations. No do you know who I am? That wasn't his style, but every step away deepened the tension beneath his calm. He wasn't surprised. Disappointed, yes. But this wasn't 2 blocks away, under the shade of a trembling magnolia. He stopped, pulled out his phone, dialed a number. Put me through to Emerson, he said softly. The voice on the other end jumped. Emerson? Chef Emerson? That's the one. A pause. He's at Westbridge. You want him pulled? No. I want to see what he's cooking. That night, Shaq checked into a small riverside motel under the name Jerome LaRue. The woman at the desk didn't recognize him but offered him sweet tea and told him about her cousin's jazz band playing Friday nights. He thanked her, then retired to his room, a plain unit with floral wallpaper, buzzing light, and a dusty Bible in the drawer. He sat on the edge of the bed, pulled out a worn notebook, and wrote one line, still happening, same script, different curtains. He thumbed through old pages, notes from Chicago, Memphis, Birmingham, places where the hotels bore history not just in design, but in the air. He wasn't just buying buildings, he was reclaiming stories, interrupting patterns. That night he dreamt of Lucille again. She stood on a porch, hanging linens, humming. She didn't look at him, just said, "Don't shout. Make 'em listen," then disappeared into the light. By morning Shaq was walking again. He bought a newspaper from a stand near the hotel, sat at the cafe across the street, and watched. The rhythm of the place told him everything. Who got greeted, who got ignored, who got eye contact, who got clipped words. He watched Lena, the concierge, visibly shrink every time Trevor passed, watched the bellhop hustle harder when guests looked like money, watched Emerson exit the back, arms full of fresh produce, laughing with a vendor. Still the same Emerson. Shaq smiled to himself. He scribbled another note. Power never changed who he was. Pressure did. As noon hit, a teenage kid bellhop uniform askew, name tag crooked, passed by Shaq's table, glancing curiously. Hey, the kid said, unsure. You that guy from TV? Shaq grinned, shook his head. Nah, I just look like him. The kid looked skeptical, then laughed. You don't talk like him though. What's your name? Jace. I work over there. Shaq nodded. And how's that? The boy hesitated. It's a good job. Pays okay. Just got rules, you know? What kind? Like, rules for some folks. Other folks got different ones. But that's just how it goes. Shaq's eyes locked onto his. Says who? Jace didn't answer, just shrugged. Then, like a shift of wind, he leaned in slightly and said, I got a video of what happened yesterday, when that manager turned you away. Shaq raised an eyebrow. Why would you have that? Don't ask me why I started filming. Just felt like I should. Shaq didn't smile. Keep it. Don't post it. Not yet. Jace nodded. You gonna do something about it? Shaq stood, dropped a 50 on the table, and said, Already am. He walked back toward the motel, his steps slow, the heat rising off the pavement in shimmering waves. The hotel sat behind him, gleaming white, proud and polished. But now it was being watched. Its next chapter was already being written, quietly, intentionally, and with the kind of authority no title or suit could match. Big Shaq wasn't there to make noise. He was there to change atmosphere, and it had just begun. He was adjusting the corner of a welcome mat when he saw the man approaching from the end of the block. Large frame, hoodie, no suitcase, no apparent destination. Trevor's posture stiffened. As Shaquille O'Neal, Big Shaq approached, his steps were calm, almost rhythmic. He had no hurry in his bones. The city moved around him like it always had, shifting, watching, whispering. But Shaq never reacted. He'd learned long ago the power of silence. He wore his humility like armor. Trevor didn't recognize him. Not really. He saw a figure that didn't belong in the narrative he'd constructed for Westbridge. The casual clothes, the lack of introduction, the self-assurance. It all clashed against the curated image Trevor tried so hard to maintain. And when Shaq stepped onto the red carpet without hesitation, Trevor moved forward like a bouncer at the door of a private club. "Excuse me, sir," Trevor said, voice cool and clipped. "Can I help you with something?" Shaq looked up, his expression unreadable. "I was thinking of checking the place out." "We're currently at full occupancy," Trevor replied quickly, eyes darting to the bellhop nearby, signaling to be alert. "Unfortunately, we don't allow walk-ins during peak hours. Reservation only." Shaq glanced behind him. No line, no guests waiting, no rush. "I won't be long," he said evenly. "Just wanted to take a look." Trevor's smile tightened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm afraid that's not possible, sir. A house policy." Shaq nodded, slowly. "All right." He didn't argue, didn't protest, just turned and stepped off the carpet. But something shifted in that moment. Trevor felt it, like he'd passed a test he didn't know he was taking. Like the man he'd dismissed had seen something in him, and found it lacking. Shaq walked away without looking back, and Trevor stood still, watching him vanish into the haze of the afternoon. A hint of discomfort brushed across his chest, but he pushed it down. There were guests to greet, standards to maintain. Inside, the staff buzzed with nervous energy. Word had already spread that someone had been turned away at the door. The bellhop, Jace, leaned against a hallway column, brows furrowed. "Who was that?" he asked Lena quietly. She shook her head, didn't say, but Mr. Langston looked like he saw a ghost. Jace checked his phone. His fingers hovered over the screen. He'd caught the exchange, had started recording the second Trevor began speaking. Something in the tone had set off an instinct. It wasn't loud, it wasn't aggressive, but it was there, the contempt beneath the cordiality. Jace had seen it before, at stores, at school, at restaurants, when his cousin tried to pay with cash. It wasn't new, just more polished. Meanwhile, Trevor returned to his office on the second floor, a sleek corner space with panoramic windows overlooking the courtyard. He sat at his desk, scrolling through emails, sipping imported coffee, but his thoughts kept drifting. There was something about that man, not just his height, though the guy was a giant, but the way he'd looked at him. Not confrontational, not scared, just aware. It was unnerving. Trevor pulled up the guest list, searching for any mention of scheduled inspections or VIP walkthroughs. Nothing. He exhaled and turned his attention back to operations. There were catering events to finalize, a shipment of vintage wines delayed, and the upcoming investor weekend to prepare for. He buried himself in the comfort of logistics. Downstairs, Shaq sat at a cafe across the street, sipping lemonade. He hadn't expected a red carpet. He hadn't come looking for confrontation. He'd come for truth, and now he had it. The gatekeeper had revealed himself. Shaq leaned back in his chair, letting the savannah breeze cool his skin. He watched as guests arrived, and were ushered in with practiced elegance. Watched how Lena stood a little straighter when Trevor walked by. Watched Jace pretend not to see the broken luggage cartwheel because no one had replaced it yet. This wasn't about one man. This was about atmosphere. About the invisible hand that shaped experience. Shaq had lived it. In locker rooms, in airports, on red carpets where he was both the main act and the one searched twice. Fame didn't erase racism. It just made people hide it better. Later that evening, as the sky bruised into a dusty pink, Trevor stood by the concierge desk, reviewing the night schedule. A woman approached mid-30s, elegant, dressed in a dark blue jumpsuit and heels that clicked softly against the marble floor. "Mr. Langston?" she asked. He turned, flashing his most professional smile. "Yes, ma'am. How can I help you?" "I'm with Northbridge Equity. I'll be shadowing the property this week." Trevor's smile froze for a second, then widened. "Of course. We've been expecting someone. Would you like a tour?" She nodded. "But I prefer to observe quietly. I won't interfere." Trevor gestured graciously. "We'll make sure you have everything you need." As she walked away, Trevor turned to Lena. "Make sure her suite is prepped. Champagne, chocolate, the works." Lena nodded. Back at the cafe, Shaq received a text. "She's in. Phase 2 begins." He nodded to himself, closed the notebook in front of him, and stood. Trevor Langston didn't know it yet, but the hotel he ran with such smug precision was about to be unwrapped, layer by layer, until the truth underneath was impossible to ignore. And all because the man he'd dismissed wasn't just another passerby. He was the owner. The storm was coming, and the gatekeeper in white gloves had just opened the wrong door. Jace Carter had been working at the Westbridge for just over 8 months, and already he felt like he'd seen 10 years of people pass through those gold-plated doors. To the guests he was the skinny bellhop with quick hands, polite silence, and a head full of music. To the staff, he was the kid who worked double shifts without complaining, and who kept to himself, headphones always hanging around his neck like a second skin. But what most people didn't know, not Lena, not even Tommy the janitor, was that Jace recorded everything. Not for vanity, not for clout, but because truth had a habit of disappearing in places like this. It started on a rainy October night. A black couple had checked in late, stylish, well-dressed, speaking softly. Trevor had been on the floor that evening. Jace had watched from behind the luggage cart, as Trevor's demeanor changed the moment he saw them. Smile tight, hands folded behind his back, offering the smallest suite, even though better ones were available. The couple hadn't argued. They'd taken their key and gone upstairs. Jace had recorded that interaction with shaking hands. Unsure why he did it. Just knew he had to. Since then his phone had filled up with quiet offenses. A look, a tone, a denial, always explained away later as policy. So when the giant in the hoodie walked up the hotel steps, a few days ago, alone, calm, and somehow commanding despite the casual wear, Jace noticed, and when Trevor intercepted him with his usual silk-wrapped steel, Jace felt that same tightening in his chest. He started recording before a single word was exchanged. The camera caught everything. The fake smile, the cold brush-off, the subtle way Trevor angled his body like a blockade instead of a greeter. It wasn't just that Trevor had refused service. It was how. Like Shaq wasn't a person. Like he was a problem. But what caught Jace even more off guard was Shaq's reaction. He didn't challenge, didn't even flinch. He simply nodded and walked away. That was the part that made Jace stop the recording, press it to his chest for a moment, and wonder, what kind of man does that? Later that evening, while pretending to clean the sidewalk by the cafe across the street, Jace spotted the same man, sitting calmly at an outdoor table, sipping lemonade like he had no care in the world. Jace didn't plan to speak, but curiosity overrode hesitation. "You that guy from TV?" he'd asked cautiously. Shaq didn't laugh. He just smiled gently.
Nah.
"I just look like him." But Jace knew. The voice gave it away. Not the tone. The timing. The pause between words. The way his eyes studied the world. But gave nothing away. "Name's Jace," the teen had offered. "I work over there." I figured, Shaq had replied, his eyes scanning the hotel entrance like he was watching history unfold. "Good place? It's all right. Long as you don't mess up. Long as you know when to disappear." There had been a silence then. Long, but not uncomfortable. "I got something," Jace said finally, "of what happened earlier. When that manager said you couldn't come in." Shaq didn't react right away. Just stirred his lemonade with a straw. Then looked up. "Why'd you record it?" Jace shrugged. Felt like it wasn't the first time. Probably won't be the last. "You post it?" "No." "Good." That was it. No lecture. No plan. Just, now. 2 days later, Jace sat alone in the break room, staring at his phone. The video was queued up, paused at the exact frame where Trevor's smile turned into a sneer. His thumb hovered over the share button. He could upload it anonymously. Let the world see. Let it burn. But he remembered Shaq's voice. Calm, grounded, unshaken. Good. Why hadn't he done anything yet? Why hadn't he called the man out? Why just walk away? Jace had grown up watching men explode. His uncle, his cousin, neighbors, always reacting. Always caught in the moment. He'd seen the cost of speaking out without power behind you. Maybe Shaq was playing a longer game. That evening, as the hotel prepared for a private donor event, Jace found himself moving through the halls with heightened awareness. Everything felt tighter, the smiles more strained, the music in the lobby turned a bit too loud, like it was trying to cover something up. Trevor was pacing. Lena was flinching. Shaq wasn't there, at least not visibly, but his presence lingered, like a storm on the edge of the sky. Jace was adjusting table centerpieces when he heard 2 voices behind the service door. Trevor and someone else. He stayed still, crouched low, hidden by the linen cart. "No, I don't care what she said. If they're coming from corporate, they need to give proper notice. I'm not adjusting protocol every time someone new wants a tour." The other voice, female, crisp, answered. "She said she wants to observe. No change is necessary." Trevor's voice dropped. These people always say that, until they want to start correcting the culture. Jace felt his stomach twist. These people. He pressed record again. Not just audio this time. He peeked his phone through the linen, capturing Trevor's face, annoyed, arrogant, threat. That night, Jace waited until the lobby emptied. He walked to the edge of the courtyard, where the security cameras didn't reach, and pulled out his phone. The file folder was filling fast. Clips, snippets, proof, and sitting at the top, the Shaq clip. He didn't know what to do with it. He couldn't go to HR. He'd seen what happened to others who tried. Complaints disappeared. Hours got cut. Schedules suddenly changed. But this wasn't just about the hotel anymore. It was about something bigger. A reckoning. The next morning, as the city yawned awake and sunlight filtered through the Spanish moss, Jace spotted him again. Shaq, standing at a corner near the pastry shop, flipping through a newspaper like he had all the time in the world. Jace approached carefully. You waiting on something? Shaq didn't look up. Already got it. Jace hesitated. So what now? Shaq turned the page, then finally looked at him. What's your goal, Jace? Goal? Yeah. You want a video to go viral? Or you want change that sticks? Jace didn't answer right away. He didn't know. Maybe both. Shaq folded the paper and tucked it under his arm. Sometimes, loud justice fades quick. Quiet justice. That echoes. You're not mad? Shaq shook his head. I've been mad. Doesn't build anything. Jace leaned against the wall. Frustrated. So what do you do? Shaq looked out across the street at the hotel. You plant seeds. You let people show you who they are. Then you move the ground under them. There was something chilling about the calm in his voice. Not vengeance. Vision. Jace pulled out his phone. Showed him the new clip from behind the linen cart. Trevor's words. The smirk. Shaq watched silently. When it ended, he nodded. Keep that too, he said. There'll be a time. When? Shaq smiled. You'll know. As the hotel bustled into the late morning rush, Jace walked back through its ornate glass doors, with something new in his chest. Not fear, not even hope, but readiness. He moved through the day like someone who knew more than he let on. He made eye contact. He didn't flinch when Trevor barked orders, and when Lena whispered, "You okay?" Jace just nodded. He was more than okay. The camera hadn't just caught the moment. It had lit the fuse. The story was unfolding behind closed doors, but the pages were turning fast now, and the man they'd tried to turn away wasn't gone. He was watching, waiting, and every second the walls got thinner. Lucille had taught him that power wasn't in volume. It was in timing. She'd been a black woman raising a massive, curious son in a world that never looked kindly on either. And still, she'd carried herself like royalty, like her feet touched more than pavement. She'd taught him to open doors with presence, not permission, to correct without punishment, to lead with silence when needed, but always, always with eyes wide open. Back in the motel, the room creaked as Shaq stood up. He folded the blueprints, slid them back into the bag, and grabbed the card key he'd been handed earlier by a woman named Mara Glenn. Mara wasn't part of front desk management. She handled inventory and procurement, worked mostly in the basement levels, rarely seen above the lobby. But Shaq had spotted her on his first walkthrough. The way she studied him without flinching, the way she held the door open just a second longer than expected. She hadn't asked for anything. She hadn't assumed. But she'd know. He'd caught her after hours by the loading dock, and introduced himself plainly. She'd blinked once, nodded once, and said, "You came to see the rot for yourself, didn't you?" That's all it took. Now she'd arranged for him to enter the hotel without announcement, through the rear service corridor, like one of the caterers or laundry drivers. He didn't mind. He preferred it. By sunrise, he was walking through the west entrance, past dumpsters and rusted signage, and into the bones of his own building. The service elevator smelled of bleach and sweat. No cameras here. No eyes. Mara met him on the third floor, near the end of the east hallway. She didn't speak much, just handed him a housekeeping badge, a folded map and a keycard marked 3. "They said it's out of order," she murmured. "But we both know it ain't." "What's the excuse?" "Broken AC. False maintenance report filed last week." "By who?" She shrugged. "Same guy who signs all the work orders but never works. Travis Deems." Shaq knew the name. Maintenance lead. Another longtime hire from the previous ownership era. Protected by familiarity, not performance. He thanked her, and she disappeared as quickly as she'd come. The hallway was empty. He moved slow, making no sound but the hum of the lights above. When he slid the card into the lock, the green light blinked, and the door clicked open.
Room 30.
He stepped inside. It was perfect. The air smelled of citrus. The counters gleamed. The bed was made with crisp hospital corners. The balcony door let in the soft morning light, casting gold streaks across the navy blue carpet. Not a single fixture was broken. The thermostat read a perfect 72 degrees. He walked the room in silence, touching nothing at first. Just absorbing. The space felt untouched, waiting, like it knew its real owner had finally come home. He opened the drawer beside the bed. Inside, a Gideon Bible, an old guest book, and something else. A folded paper, maintenance log sheet, filed 5 days ago. Signed by Travis Deems. AC failure. Room placed out of order. Do not assign. Shaq smiled, slow and sharp. He placed the paper back exactly where he found it. He opened his bag, pulled out a copy of the building inspection report he'd commissioned the week before. Page 11, HVAC fee review. Room 305 marked optimal. No issues recorded. He tucked that sheet next to the log. Let them find it. After a quick shower, he changed into a black blazer and pressed slacks. Still no tie. Still no announcement. He walked the halls without drawing attention. Just another guest among many. Those who noticed him looked twice. Some stared. A few whispered, but no one stopped him. Not until he reached the lobby. Trevor was there, standing by the grand piano, chatting up a couple from Charleston. When he saw Shaq, his smile faltered, just slightly. A flicker in the polished act. He didn't approach. Not yet. He couldn't place it, but something about the man felt familiar now. A puzzle piece out of place. That hoodie from days ago had become a suit. That silent walk now a presence he couldn't ignore. Shaq didn't flinch, didn't speak. Just crossed the lobby and entered the dining area, nodding to a staff member who smiled, unsure but courteous. At a table near the back, Chef Emerson spotted him. He froze for a split second, recognition dawning in waves. He set down the tray he was carrying, wiped his hands on his apron, and walked over with disbelief. "I'll be damned," he muttered. "Shaquille O'Neal in my dining room." Shaq grinned. "Been a long time, Em. What are you doing here? Eating? And after that?" Shaq leaned in slightly. Watching. Listening. Maybe cleaning house. Emerson didn't ask more. He simply nodded and said, "You let me know if the eggs are undercooked." Later, as Shaq returned to room 305, he passed Lena by the elevators. She looked nervous. Her eyes flicked to his face, then away. "You all right?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then whispered, "They think someone from corporate is coming."
Do they now?
She nodded. "They're acting different."
Good.
He stepped into the elevator without another word, leaving her confused but hopeful. Back in the suite, he stood by the window and watched the city breathe below. Cars moved slowly. Trees swayed. Somewhere, church bells rang faintly. And room 305, the room they'd hidden, now held its true occupant. There would be no announcement, no press, no grand speech, just truth, waiting in the shadows. And when it came forward, the ones who built walls with policy and smiles would have nowhere left to hide. The storm didn't announce itself with thunder. It crept in slowly, wrapping the savannah sky in thick gray wool, until the sun was just a rumor. The streets darkened, the air thickened, and the wind, soft at first, began to hum along the gutters and between the cracks of the Westbridge Hotel's centuries-old bones. It was the kind of storm that didn't just wet the sidewalks, it awakened ghosts. Shaq stood at the tall arched window of room 305, a cup of black coffee in his hand, watching as tourists scattered and umbrellas bloomed like sudden flowers. Rain speckled the glass, steady, slow, then harder. He wasn't leaving the hotel today. No one was. And maybe that was the point. Below him, the lobby lights had been dimmed to a warm amber glow. The staff moved in practiced rhythms, hiding their tension behind courteous nods and manufactured poise. Shaq studied them like a silent observer in a slow play. The front desk tightened. The concierge's smile grew thinner. Even Trevor, always so polished, had started sweating through his collar. He knew the corporate observer was still in the building. Or so he believed. He had no idea the man watching him wasn't someone in slacks with a clipboard. He was already upstairs, already reading. It had started early that morning, when Shaq took the back stairwell down to the service floor beneath the lobby. A low, stone-walled corridor that smelled of wet wood and old bleach. There was a door at the end with no label, no welcome, just a tarnished brass handle and a padlock that wasn't fully closed. He opened it. Inside, the room breathed history. A forgotten archive. The walls were lined with dusty filing cabinets, crates stacked high, and shelves sagging under the weight of time. In one corner, a wooden desk stood crooked, covered in yellowing envelopes and cracked leather binders. Shaq stepped inside, letting the door fall closed behind him. He moved slowly, reverently. These weren't just files. They were relics. Proof. He found guest books first. Neat cursive signatures from the 1930s and 40s. Names like Whitmore, Baskin, Judge R.L. Worthen. Some lines had notes beside them. Preferred corner suite. Private entrance required. Negro staff only. Shaq turned the pages carefully, feeling the rot beneath the elegance. Then farther back, a different kind of entry. Sloppier handwriting. Angrier ink. Denied again. Said coloreds not allowed to enter the front lobby. Mama cried when they made us eat in the alley. Mr. Claridge said we could stay if we didn't tell no one. Shaq paused. That name, Claridge. He turned to one of the leather binders and flipped it open. Property records. Transfer deeds. Ledgers. The Claridge family had owned the Westbridge for nearly 100 years before it changed hands twice and landed in his portfolio. But what the records showed wasn't just ownership. It was policy, written in contracts. This property shall maintain standards suitable to its original clientele. Vague, but loaded. Codes within codes. He kept digging. Found letters. One from 1964, signed by a hotel manager, promising to refund a white guest's stay because a black porter had helped them with their bags. Another from 1971, expressing concern about hosting a mixed-race wedding. It wasn't history, it was a blueprint of exclusion. Then he found the envelope, thicker than the others, sealed with wax long since dried and flaked. Inside were photographs, black and white, some bent at the corners, edges curled with age. One showed a row of black kitchen staff lined up in the alley, uniforms stained, standing next to a crate marked service only. Another showed a wedding party where the bride's smile was tight, and a lone dark-skinned maid stood half-hidden behind a curtain, holding a tray she hadn't meant to be photographed with. But what caught Shaq most was the third picture, a wide shot of the grand ballroom, chandeliers sparkling, and off to the far side, a young woman in a dress, crying quietly while a man in a white jacket pointed her toward the side exit. The past wasn't buried. It had been filed, systematized, kept safe, hidden behind formality and paperwork. But now it was awake. The storm outside rattled the pipes overhead as rain poured harder, drowning the streetlights and turning the marble floors of the lobby into mirrors. Shaq gathered what he needed and climbed back to his room, slipping in unnoticed through the service lift. He laid the documents out on the table near the balcony and stared at them until his coffee went cold. Everything made sense now. The way Trevor treated people, the guest list policies, the subtle rotation of black staff into back-of-house roles. It wasn't new. It was inherited. And Trevor? He wasn't the origin. He was just a continuation. At noon, the lights flickered. The storm had knocked out the outer grid. A moment later, the emergency backup lighting kicked in, soft gold glows lining the ceilings, casting shadows where brightness used to reign. The hotel staff scrambled to reassure guests that everything was under control. Shaq, still in room 305, watched the chaos below with quiet eyes. In the hallway, Jace moved quickly, helping guests carry their luggage from elevator stalls to rooms. He passed Lena, who looked like she was holding her breath all day long. "You good?" he asked. She nodded. "Feels like the building's holding its breath." "I know," Jace whispered. "Something's coming." In the kitchen, Emerson was working with just backup power, improvising meals with what could be cooked on gas. He'd been watching too. He'd seen Shaq in the dining room, seen him glance at staff, heard how softly he moved. Emerson knew people, and this man, he wasn't some mystery guest. He was a fuse. By 2 p.m. guests had congregated in the lobby, unable to go out, the rain trapping them in place. Trevor moved between them like a conductor, voice light, gesture sweeping. "We apologize for the inconvenience. Complimentary drinks are available in the lounge. Our staff is here for anything you need." But his eyes kept drifting toward the man seated quietly by the fireplace. Black blazer, no name tag, no smile, just presence. He still didn't know. Shaq kept a manila folder on the chair next to him. Inside it, the photos, the letters, the logs. At 3:47 p.m., a loud snap echoed through the lobby as lightning hit a transformer 3 blocks away. The lights flickered again, then held steady. Trevor flinched. Shaq didn't move. Lena crossed the floor toward the front desk. Her hands were shaking. She opened a drawer and pulled out the old guest book, the leather-bound one, only used for special dignitaries and high-profile visitors. She flipped to the last page, and there it was. A new signature, scrawled in bold letters from that morning. Her breath caught. Her knees weakened. She looked up, scanning the room, eyes locking onto the man by the fireplace. Their eyes met. He nodded once. She closed the book slowly and turned to Trevor, who was mid-conversation with an investor couple. Her voice was quiet but clear. "You should check the registry." Trevor blinked. "Now?" She handed him the book. He opened it. Froze. Color drained from his face as his eyes darted to the man seated across the room. Suddenly recognizable. Suddenly massive, not just in body but in weight. A name that should have made headlines. A man he'd turned away days earlier, like a stray dog at his doorstep. He stumbled backward a step, the leather book still open in his hand. Shaq stood. No announcement. No dramatic music. Just movement. He picked up the manila folder and walked across the lobby, slow, deliberate, every eye now following. Guests murmured. Staff rose. He stopped in front of Trevor. "You said room 305 was under maintenance," Shaq said, voice low but clear. Trevor opened his mouth, closed it. Shaq opened the folder and handed him the maintenance log, the inspection report, the photographs, the letters. "You're not the first to keep the door closed." Trevor looked at the papers, then at the faces surrounding him. No escape. Shaq's eyes locked on his. "But I'm the last one who's gonna let it slide." Then he turned and walked away. No explosion, no raised voice, just the storm echoing behind him. The walls of the Westbridge had whispered long enough. Now they were shouting. The morning after the storm, Savannah woke up damp and steaming. The clouds had scattered, but the air held that sticky weight, like the city itself hadn't quite exhaled. Puddles filled cobblestone grooves, and the scent of wet brick drifted upward into the grand halls of the Westbridge Hotel. But inside, the atmosphere had shifted. Not from the weather, from what had been seen. Word had traveled fast through whispers and knowing glances. He's here. He's not just a guest. No one said Shaquille O'Neal's name out loud, but it hung in the air. Trevor was unusually quiet, avoiding eye contact with nearly everyone. The confidence in his steps had dimmed, and for the first time since his arrival at Westbridge 5 years ago, the mask of untouchable authority was cracking. But the attention wasn't on Trevor anymore. It was on the people who actually ran the hotel, the ones who lived behind the desk, behind the kitchen doors, behind the illusion of luxury. And Shaq knew it was time to listen. He started with Lena. She stood at the concierge desk that morning, straightening a stack of brochures with robotic precision. Her name tag shimmered in the light. Lena Ward, guest relations. But she never looked like she belonged in that title. She had a presence that was soft-spoken, restrained, like a flame constantly dimmed by wind. Her uniform was pressed, her hair pulled tight into a bun, her eyes constantly calculating who was watching. She'd learned how to make herself smaller without disappearing. That was a survival tactic, not a personality trait. Shaq approached quietly, setting a folded city map on the desk between them. "I was looking for the jazz club that used to be across from Whitaker Street," he said. "Still around?" Lena looked up, startled, then nodded faintly. "They moved it to Riverwalk 2 years ago. New name now. Same sax player." "You remember the old one?" She smiled, not wide but real. "My mom used to take me when she couldn't find a sitter." Shaq leaned slightly forward, voice low. "You always this good at remembering what matters." The smile flickered. "I try." He tapped the counter lightly. "Keep doing that." He walked away, and Lena stood still, her fingers resting on the edge of the map like it had weight. She wasn't sure what had just happened, but something inside her spine straightened. Later that day, Shaq slipped into the maintenance corridor behind the ballroom. It was where most guests never wandered, a stretch of dim-lit halls with mop buckets, paint cans, a leaky ice machine no one had fixed in years. There, sitting on an overturned crate, and smoking a cigarette like it was part of his soul, was Tommy Garrison, the janitor with more keys than anyone else in the building, and more stories than anyone bothered to ask about. Tommy had been at Westbridge since 1983. Before the Claridges sold. Before Trevor. Before the new money. And he'd survived it all. By knowing when to speak. And more importantly, when not to. You always sit here around this time? Shaq asked, easing down on a crate across from him. Tommy squinted through the smoke. Depends who's asking. Shaq smiled. Name's Shaq. Tommy chuckled. Yeah, I figured. Thought it was a trick of the light yesterday. But when you walked through that lobby, I knew. You tell anyone?
Nah, let them see it themselves. Always better that way.
They sat in silence for a few seconds, listening to the buzz of old wiring in the walls. You seen a lot, huh? Shaq said finally. Tommy exhaled smoke. I've seen him repaint the walls every few years, change the chandeliers, put out new mints, but I also seen who gets let through the front door, and who gets told to wait outside. Shaq looked at him. You ever speak on it? Tommy shrugged. Spoken don't mean heard, so I started sweeping more and talking less. Shaq leaned forward, elbows on knees. Maybe it's time to start again. Tommy studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly, almost reluctantly. Maybe. By mid-afternoon, the scent of roasted garlic and smoked paprika drifted into the hallways. Unmistakable signs of Chef Emerson Tate back in his kitchen. The man had presence, not just in stature, though he wasn't small, but in the way he moved through his domain like a conductor. He barked orders with a rhythm that never felt cruel. He laughed loud. He cursed louder, but it was the kind of chaos that felt alive and loyal. Shaq waited until the lunch rush slowed, then stepped into the kitchen from the rear. Emerson turned, wiping sweat from his brow with a towel. Well, damn, he said, recognizing the face before him. You finally showing your face, or you still pretending to be a guest? I am a guest, Shaq grinned. But I'm also a friend. Emerson shook his head, then wrapped him in a one-armed hug that smelled like thyme and heat. You could have told me sooner. I wanted to see who was still real. You found out yet? Shaq looked around the kitchen, at the dishwasher humming a blues tune, the pastry chef swiping lemon curd on a tart like it was art, the line cook fixing a cracked cutting board with duct tape. Yeah, he said, I'm starting to. They walked outside into the delivery alley behind the hotel, a place Emerson often went to cool down. They leaned against the wall, the bricks still slick from yesterday's storm. You knew me when I didn't have $1 to my name, Shaq said. Yeah, Emerson nodded. And you still had the biggest heart in the room. Shaq chuckled. You always knew how to talk sweet. Emerson's smile faded just slightly. You here to change things? I'm here to reveal what's already broken. Change comes after. The chef looked back toward the hotel's back door. Place has been sick a long time, man. Some of us just got used to the fever.
You ready to sweat it out?
You lead. I'll follow. The bond was sealed. That night, room 305 was quiet. But Shaq's mind wasn't. He stood at the window again, watching the hotel glow from within like a gilded box, beautiful on the outside, but hollow in places. He thought of Lena, standing at that desk with her voice muted by fear, of Tommy, smoking his silence like a prayer, of Emerson, loud but tired. They weren't employees, they were the foundation, and foundations needed to be seen. He took out a notepad from his duffel bag and wrote 3 names. Lena, Tommy, Emerson. Underneath he wrote, trust them, teach them, put the light on them. He folded the paper, slid it into the front pocket of his jacket, and picked up the old photographs once again. The ghosts of this hotel weren't just stories, they were patterns, and the only way to break a pattern was to call it out, not by yelling, but by elevating the people it tried to erase. Tomorrow, things would shift. But tonight, Shaq let the walls talk. Let the quiet hum between floors tell him the truth. The real power of a place wasn't in its chandeliers or imported rugs. It was in the faces behind the desk. The ones who remembered names, carried burdens, cleaned messes, cooked for strangers, and still came back the next day, head high. They were ready for more. And now, he was ready to give it to them. 3 months earlier, the Westbridge Hotel looked exactly the same on the outside. Polished columns, manicured hedges, the same flags flapping above the entrance. But something inside its structure had already started to shift. Not the plumbing or wiring, but something deeper, more permanent. Ownership. It happened quietly, as Shaq liked it. No press release. No photos of champagne glasses clinking over glossy conference tables. The acquisition went through under the name Northbridge Equity, one of the many holding companies Shaq used to protect his anonymity in business. The shell firm was clean, solid, unassuming, just another private group buying up Southern real estate. But this was never just about real estate. The decision to purchase Westbridge had come after months of research, personal visits, and community reports. Shaq had built his post-basketball legacy, not just in boardrooms, but in whispered conversations behind closed doors, in churches and corner stores, among the people who felt what policy never touched. The atmosphere. Westbridge came up repeatedly in those conversations. Beautiful hotel, but something wasn't right. Staff quitting without reason. Locals feeling unwanted. Guests of color describing experiences that left no marks but plenty of scars. Shaq didn't respond with outrage. He responded with paperwork. The initial offer had been rejected. The owners, a syndicate of East Coast investors, weren't interested in selling. Not at first. But Northbridge Equity made the second offer harder to refuse. It came bundled with options, exit strategies, and tax breaks too tempting for even the greediest hands to ignore. The deal was sealed 2 weeks later, in a private office in Charleston. The contract included a clause that no announcement be made until all internal reviews were complete. That bought Shaq time to look closer. Now in the present, with storm waters receded and eyes turned inward, that plan was about to meet its crescendo. But back then, in the soft-lit quiet of a late September afternoon, Trevor Langston received an email that stopped him cold. Subject: Westbridge Portfolio Review. Internal ownership transition pending. From corporate ad, northbridgeequity.com. Body: Dear Mr. Langston, please be advised that Westbridge Hotel has been selected for internal audit and performance review under new corporate directives. A representative of ownership may visit the property within the next 90 days without advance notice. Please ensure all operational protocols reflect company standards. Trevor had read it 3 times before realizing what it meant. Ownership transition. Review. Unscheduled visit. Those words, harmless in isolation, carried heavy implication when placed together. It wasn't uncommon for hotels to change hands, but Trevor prided himself on being the first to know, not the last. No one had looped him in. No whisper from the board. No heads up from legal. It felt like the ground beneath him had shifted slightly, imperceptibly, but enough to throw off his balance. He stood in his office, clutching the mouse with a death grip, heart knocking against his ribs. The Westbridge was his. Not by deed, of course. He didn't own a brick of it. But in reputation, image, policy. He'd spent 5 years turning it into what he called a refined experience, meaning it catered to a very specific clientele. He'd transformed it from a tired Southern relic into a boutique destination for wealthy professionals and old money types who liked their hospitality served with thin smiles and firm boundaries. Trevor was the face of it, and now, a new face was coming. Unseen, unnamed. He clicked through the attachment, a simple PDF with bullet points outlining internal assessments, revenue expectations, and staff behavior metrics. It was dry reading, yet every line throbbed with quiet authority. One sentence lingered like smoke. The new owner reserves the right to make structural, operational, and personnel changes effective immediately following audit completion. He swallowed hard. Personnel changes. That was code. That was a warning. Still, he composed himself, smoothed his tie, and clicked reply. Thank you for the update. We look forward to aligning with Northbridge Equity's expectations. Please advise when the visit is scheduled so we may prepare accordingly. The response came within 5 minutes. No schedule will be provided. Owner may arrive unannounced. Trevor stared at the screen for a full minute before shutting the laptop. That night, he walked the property twice. Once during dinner service. Once after midnight. Every scuff on the baseboards felt like a violation. Every smudge on a window became an insult. He demanded a full floor-to-floor audit the next morning. He barked at Lena to update all reservation policies. He told Tommy to double the cleaning rotations, replace bulbs whether they needed replacing, or not. He sent Emerson a memo about kitchen presentation and staff attire refinement, though he knew the chef would probably laugh and ignore it. He didn't care. He needed order. What haunted him most was the unknown. He tried to imagine the new owner, probably some wiry man in Italian loafers, or a clean-cut legacy heir with a Harvard MBA and a distrust of emotion. Someone he could charm. Someone he could impress. But even as he curated the perfect welcome plan, something in his gut twisted. because this wasn't a normal handover. It was too quiet, too surgical, the kind of silence that usually came before a blade. 3 days later, he received a letter in the mail. Real paper, thick envelope, delivered by courier, no return address. Inside, a letterhead marked only with the initials NB. Mr. Langston. This is a reminder that Northbridge Equity expects that all guests, regardless of race, class, or appearance, be treated with equal professionalism. Our business model is not built on surface-level appeal, but long-term integrity. Sincerely. NBE Internal Affairs. There was no signature, no name. Trevor read the letter 5 times. The air in his office felt thinner with each read. The line, regardless of race, pulsed like a bruise beneath his skin. He remembered recent incidents. The hoodie at the door, the complaint about valet service, the couple who left early without explanation. He'd rationalized each of them. Policy, standards, comfort levels. But now he realized he'd been watched. Not directly, maybe, but enough to raise red flags. He called a meeting the next morning. The staff gathered in the main conference room. Lena stood against the wall, eyes lowered. Tommy leaned against the doorway, arms folded. Emerson didn't show. Trevor stood at the head of the table and gave a short, flat speech. Corporate is evaluating all properties. We may be visited by a representative of the new owner at any time. I expect nothing short of excellence. Uniforms are mandatory. Language matters. And perception is everything. That means no phones out, no loitering in guest areas. And if you're not sure whether something's appropriate, it isn't. He looked around the room, faces blank, lips tight.
Any questions? No one raised a hand.
Good. He left before anyone could speak. Behind him, conversations resumed in low whispers. Jace looked at Lena, brows raised. She just shook her head. Back in his office, Trevor rechecked the registry. Every new booking felt like it could be the one. He watched every guest who entered. Tall man in a business suit? Possible. Woman with a clipboard and phone always buzzing? Could be. A couple with matching luggage and quiet stares? Maybe. He didn't suspect the man who came alone, in a hoodie, without a suitcase. The one who walked slow and asked soft questions. The one who didn't need to announce himself. And that was the mistake. Because by the time Trevor realized who Shaquille O'Neal really was, the paperwork had already cleared. The contracts were locked. The power had already shifted. There was no offer on the table anymore. There was only ownership. But still, something gnawed at him, because no matter how many chairs he rearranged, how many soft, unfit employees he dismissed, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, not just by cameras, not just by corporate, watched by someone already here. That's when he made the final entry on his list. It was a performance, of course. Not for the staff. He didn't care what they felt. But for the invisible eyes he imagined trailing every move. If the owner valued inclusion, he would simulate it. He would turn empathy into a The email went out that evening. Subject, mandatory cultural sensitivity briefing. Time, tomorrow, 11. Location, Magnolia Conference Room. Attendance required for all staff currently on schedule. The next morning, the Magnolia Room was half lit. Chairs arranged in a semicircle. A projector humming faintly on the center table. At the front stood Trevor in a tailored charcoal suit. A smile stretched too tightly across his face. Behind him, a small screen displayed a generic slide, building a welcoming workplace. The staff trickled in, Lena, eyes downcast. Jace, with arms folded. Emerson stood near the back wall, expression unreadable. Even Tommy, rarely seen above the lower floors, took a seat in the corner. One by one, they came out of fear, obligation, or plain curiosity. And then, last to arrive, was the man Trevor hadn't noticed in the back row, Shaq. Dressed in dark slacks and a muted dress shirt, he took the seat closest to the wall, folding his arms across his chest, legs stretched slightly forward, as if daring the room to pretend he wasn't there. Trevor scanned the group but didn't notice him. Not yet. Thank you all for being here, he began, clearing his throat. This meeting is about creating alignment. We've had some feedback, and it's important we all understand the values of the Westbridge brand. He clicked the remote, and the screen changed. Diversity, the power of unity. Shaq blinked once. Jace smirked. Emerson sighed under his breath. Trevor went on. Now, diversity doesn't just mean race. It's about culture, background, class, and attitude. It's about knowing how to serve all guests, without bias. Whether someone wears a hoodie or a suit, They deserve the same treatment. The words hung there, hollow, rehearsed, offensive in their emptiness. Lena glanced sideways at Shaq, but he didn't move. Just stared at Trevor, unmoving. Trevor pressed on, now reading from a bulleted sheet. We must be careful with casual language. Certain phrases can make guests uncomfortable. Let's say sir and ma'am, not boss or yo. Let's make sure uniforms are clean, and that hairstyles reflect professionalism. We're not here to express ourselves, we're here to reflect the Westbridge standard. Murmurs started, quiet ones. Jace rolled his eyes. Tommy shifted in his seat. Trevor mistook their silence for absorption. And finally, he said, we should remember that every interaction matters. First impressions last. I want each of you to reflect our core values in every moment. We never know who's watching. He clicked again. Final slide. Diversity isn't a risk. It's an asset. As he turned to face the room, his eyes swept the back row and froze. Shaq stared back, unreadable. Trevor's mouth opened. Nothing came out. He hadn't expected to see him there. Hadn't realized the owner he feared had been sitting in his conference room, listening to every word of his shallow attempt at inclusion. A silence settled over the room like thick smoke. Everyone could feel it. Shaq rose slowly from his chair. Trevor straightened. If I'd known you were... Shaq raised one hand, palm out. A gentle hush. No theatrics. He walked forward, passing Lena, who exhaled quietly, past Jace, who sat up straighter, past Tommy, who nodded once, almost to himself. He stopped at the center of the room, looking not at Trevor, but at the group. I've been to a lot of places, he said, voice even. Sat in a lot of meetings like this, heard a lot of words that sounded right, but didn't mean anything. No one blinked. I'm not here for your policies. I'm here for your people, the ones who've been running this hotel while being told they don't quite fit in. His eyes scanned the room, then rested on Trevor. You don't fix culture with a slide deck. Trevor swallowed. Mr. O'Neill, I assure you, you assured me once already, Shaq said, at the front door. And then he walked out. No slamming, no shouting, just a quiet exit that thundered louder than any speech. The room stayed still for a long moment. Then, Emerson muttered, well, damn. The sky split without warning. A deafening crack of thunder shook the windows of the Westbridge Hotel just as dusk fell over Savannah. Lightning etched white veins across the horizon. And within seconds the sky opened up. Rain came down like it had something to prove, hard and relentless, drumming against the high windows, turning the entrance canopy into a steady waterfall. By nightfall the streets were empty, swallowed by floodwater and flashing hazard lights. The city slowed, but inside the Westbridge, tension picked up speed. The storm had rolled in fast, forcing guests to abandon evening plans and return to the lobby. The grand atrium, normally quiet after cocktail hour, buzzed with idle chatter, complaints and the occasional click of designer heels on tile. The storm's pressure hung thick in the air, but so did something else. Something unspoken. Shaq sat quietly in the corner near the fireplace, dressed in dark gray slacks, and a simple jacket, a book open in his lap, unread. He wasn't hiding anymore, but he still hadn't declared himself. Instead, he watched, every move, every glance, every whispered exchange between staff and guests. Trevor paced by the front desk, jaw clenched tighter with every passing moment. The storm had canceled the arrival of the next wave of investors. The kitchen was short-staffed. Emerson had refused to run the night menu without prep time. And Lena had gently told a high-paying guest that the power outages were city-wide, not the hotel's fault. Trevor had snapped at her in front of everyone. But what set him on edge most wasn't the rain or the missed dinner service. It was the man in the corner, silent, still. Trevor didn't know what Shaq was waiting for. That's what unnerved him. He didn't know if there'd be a press conference, a firing spree, a board meeting where Trevor's name was already inked off the payroll. So he leaned into the only thing he had left, performance. He straightened his tie, smoothed his suit coat, and walked into the lobby like he was hosting a gala. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced with a forced smile, raising his voice above the thunder. We thank you for your patience. I know the weather's disrupted your plans, but please make yourselves comfortable. Complimentary drinks are available, and we've asked Chef Emerson to send out a special tray of hors d'oeuvres shortly. He smiled. A few scattered claps, but most people just shifted uncomfortably. Then, as if the building itself had grown tired of his speech, The lights flickered once, then again, and finally cut out. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. Emergency backup kicked in within seconds. Dull gold lights humming from the floorboards, casting long shadows across every elegant detail. The piano in the corner loomed like a specter. Chandeliers no longer sparkled. The glamour had dulled. And in that half-light, the hotel looked different. Honest. Trevor's voice dropped. Tighter now. Staff will be available if you need anything. Please avoid the elevators until full power is restored. A voice from the crowd, older, male, and amused. Maybe try keeping the lights on instead of the flowers fresh. Laughter bubbled up, quick and uncomfortable. Trevor flushed. He turned sharply and motioned Jace forward. You, he snapped under his breath. Find the AV panel. Make sure that damn projector isn't draining the backup line. Jace didn't move right away. Trevor noticed. Now. Jace walked off, but not toward the AV panel. He went to the rear utility closet instead, where he'd hidden his phone and a small HDMI cable earlier that day, just in case. He'd been planning this moment for a week. He didn't know if it would come, but now, it felt like it had arrived. Back in the lobby, guests murmured, shifting in the seats arranged in clusters around the room. The fire in the hearth flickered in the darkness, casting soft gold across the floors. And then Trevor, who had wandered toward the lounge bar, let his frustration slip. He didn't think anyone important was listening. That was his mistake. I swear, he muttered to a guest. Too loud, too tired to censor himself. You let certain types in these places, and they forget it's supposed to be premium. The sentence dropped like a stone in a still pond. Silence. A few people turned. Others pretended they hadn't heard. But Shaq from the corner closed his book. Slowly, deliberately. Lena's breath caught. She looked toward the front desk. Tommy stood from his place near the plant wall. Emerson, who had just entered from the kitchen corridor, froze in place. And then Jace returned, walking calmly to the side of the room, where the hotel projector had been left idle for months. He connected the cable, tapped the screen, loaded the file. No announcement, just video. It started with static, then a clear image. Trevor, at the front door blocking Shaq's entry. His voice unmistakable, his tone firm. We don't allow walk-ins without a reservation. Shaq's calm response, Trevor's clipped denial, the condescension in his face. The entire lobby turned. Jace stepped forward and hit pause, right at the frame where Trevor stood in front of the doors like a gatekeeper, smug and dismissive. He looked toward the center of the room. That's how he treated the man sitting over there, he said, pointing directly at Shaq. Before he knew who he was. Gasps. Murmurs. Trevor turned, frozen in place. Shaq stood now. Slowly, like an avalanche rising. He stepped into the center of the room. No podium. No fanfare. Just gravity. He looked at Jace first. A simple nod. Respect. Then turned to the room. I didn't come here to embarrass anybody, he began. Voice low but carrying. I didn't come to throw names around. I came because this place has history. Some of it good. A lot of it bad. And I wanted to see what part of that history we were still living in. He paused. I was turned away at the front door not because of who I was, but because of what I looked like. And that wasn't an accident. That was a system. One that rewards comfort over character. No one moved. He turned toward Trevor. You made your list. You made your rules. But you forgot who keeps this place alive. It ain't the marble floors. It's not the uniforms. It's the people. The ones you dismissed. The ones you ignored. He gestured around the room. Lena, who remembers every guest's name. Emerson, who's been feeding folks from all over the world with heart and heat. Jace, who saw the truth and didn't flinch. Tommy, who's kept these walls standing for decades without asking for a thank you. They're the standard. He turned back to the guests. If you stayed here and felt welcomed, it was because of them, not in spite of them. Trevor stepped forward, mouth open. Mr. O'Neill, I can explain. Shaq raised a hand. Don't. He turned to the projector. Leave it on, he said to Jace. Let people remember. Then he walked past Trevor, past the front desk, past the crowd now thick with realization, shame and respect. The storm still raged outside, but inside something had broken open. Not with fists, not with noise, just with truth. The storm outside was finally beginning to lose its fury, but inside the Westbridge Hotel, the silence had grown louder than thunder. The lobby, once filled with soft classical music, and the clink of wine glasses, now buzzed with tension so dense it felt physical. Guests sat frozen in velvet armchairs. Staff stood still near walls and doorways, all eyes glued to the center of the room where Shaquille O'Neal stood, no longer just a mysterious guest, now something more, something known, something none. He didn't need a spotlight. He didn't raise his voice. There was no dramatic pose, no demand for applause. He was dressed like any other man might be on a rainy night in the South. Charcoal slacks, a tailored jacket, and scuffed leather shoes that had walked through more places than most people could name. But the weight of his presence, that was unmistakable. Trevor Langston stood opposite him, stiff as concrete, hands slightly shaking at his sides, eyes darting between Shaq and the lingering image still frozen on the projector behind them. Trevor himself, days earlier, standing tall with a thin smile and a condescending glare as he denied the very man before him entry into the hotel he now knew owned the building. Shaq looked around the room slowly, deliberately. He gave it space, gave people a moment to sit in what had just happened. No rush to fix it, no instinct to soften the blow. Just truth, heavy and patient. "My name is Shaquille Rashawn O'Neal," he said at last, voice steady even. "But most people call me Shaq." Someone near the back gasped. A guest audibly whispered, "Oh my God." "I played basketball for a long time," he continued. "Then did some TV, some business, some bad movies." A ripple of nervous laughter. "But in the last 10 years, I focused on something different. I've been investing, not in stocks or stadiums, in people, in communities, in stories like this one." He paused, his gaze landing directly on Trevor. "I bought the Westbridge Hotel 3 months ago, through a holding company called Northbridge Equity. Some of you might have heard the name. Most of you probably haven't. That's by design. I didn't want a parade. I didn't want photo ops. I wanted to walk into this place like anyone else would, and see how I'd be treated." Trevor opened his mouth slightly, as if to speak, but stopped himself. Shaq turned away from him, letting the silence hang for just a breath longer. "And what I experienced," he continued, "wasn't surprising, but it was disappointing." He turned back toward the room. "This isn't about one man at a front desk. It's about a culture, a way of thinking, a system that's been passed down, protected, repackaged, dressed in suits and scented candles and 4-star menus, but underneath, still rot." The staff behind the desk didn't move. Lena stood with her hands clasped tightly in front of her, tears just beginning to form in her eyes. Jace leaned against a wall, arms crossed, heart thudding with something that felt like hope. Emerson stood at the archway from the kitchen, face unreadable but jaw set. Shaq walked slowly to the center of the lobby, placing himself where the light from the chandelier hit him just enough. He faced the guests now, who were staring at him not just with recognition, but reflection. "Luxury," he said, "shouldn't mean exclusion. You can serve elegance without erasing identity. You can build class without building walls. But too often, places like this, hotels, restaurants, country clubs, they hold on to this idea that only certain types of people belong in nice spaces, that if you don't look the part, dress the part, or talk the part, you must be a mistake." He looked again toward Trevor. "I wasn't a mistake." Trevor took a step forward. "Mr. O'Neal." Shaq raised a hand. Calm. Clear. No anger. Just finality. "You've had 5 years to do it right." The words landed like thunder. Trevor froze, lips parted, hands hanging useless at his sides. Shaq continued, turning his attention back to the room. "I've watched how Lena gets spoken over, even though she knows more about this hotel than anyone on the floor. I've seen how Tommy keeps this place running from behind the scenes, while never being invited to stand in front of them. I've tasted food made by a chef who's poured his soul into every dish while being told to adjust his attire. And I've listened to a teenage kid, a bellhop who recorded injustice not for clicks but because he believed someone, someday, might care enough to listen." He looked down for a moment, then back up. "That day is today." From behind him, the projector flickered again, the clip ending, the screen going dark, leaving only the soft glow of emergency lighting and the echo of truth in the room. No one spoke. No one needed to. The message had arrived. Shaq reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "This," he said, "is a copy of the new personnel realignment plan for Westbridge Hotel. It goes into effect immediately. Departmental leadership will be restructured. Reviews will be conducted fairly. Promotions will be based on merit, not familiarity or image. And every staff member will be paid equitably for their time, effort, and value." He turned slightly, looking back at Trevor one last time. "Trevor Langston, Your termination letter is in the executive suite, signed and dated. You'll receive your severance. But you will no longer represent this hotel." Trevor's face paled. He took a step forward, desperation creeping into his voice. "Please, Mr. O'Neill. This hotel is my life." Shaq shook his head. "This hotel is our life. And you treated it like your stage." A hush washed over the lobby. Jace let out a long breath. He hadn't realized he'd been holding. Lena blinked fast, wiping her face quietly with a tissue. Emerson smiled, not wide, but with a pride that went all the way to his chest. Shaq's eyes softened slightly. "Look, I've made mistakes too. We all have. But dignity, that's non-negotiable. And for too long folks like us have been made to believe that we should be grateful to be allowed in places like this. That we don't own this kind of space. That we're just visitors. But that ends now." He looked around. "From this day forward, Westbridge will stand for something better." Someone clapped. Then another. Then the whole room, cautious at first. Then rising. Not out of celebration, but recognition. Trevor turned, stumbled toward the exit. No security needed. No spectacle. Just the quiet walk of a man who finally understood what it felt like to be unwelcome. Shaq let the applause fade. Then nodded to Lena. "You're the new general manager," he said. Lena gasped. "Sir, you earned it. A long time ago." She covered her mouth, trembling. "Tommy," Shaq added, "you're our new facilities director. Full salary, full benefits." Tommy nodded, eyes misty. "And Jace," he said last, turning toward the young man by the projector. "Your scholarship papers are being processed. You've got 4 years at any state school of your choice. Paid. In full." Jace blinked. His voice cracked. "You serious?" Shaq smiled. "Dead serious." The storm outside had faded into drizzle now. Just a whisper of rain tapping glass. But inside something had changed. Not in the furniture. Not in the branding. In the atmosphere. Truth had entered the lobby. And it didn't need a microphone. For the first time in years, the Westbridge Hotel felt still. Not silent. Not sluggish. But still in that deep, meaningful way, where the air no longer vibrated with tension. The storm had passed both outside and within, but the scent of change still lingered like fresh rain on warm pavement. Shaq hadn't said much after the night in the lobby. He hadn't called a press conference, or organized a team huddle. No victory lap. No gloating. Instead he returned quietly to room 305, took off his jacket, and stared out the balcony at the darkened city. Savannah slept like a place finally exhaling after holding its breath for far too long. And downstairs, so did Trevor Langston, though his sleep was lighter, disturbed by echoes of the previous evening, by the weight of stairs that had followed him down the hallway. In the hollow way his footsteps had sounded without the usual echo of power behind them. Shaq hadn't fired him that night. That was the surprise. Trevor had expected it, braced for it. He'd been ready to spin it to call it unjust, sudden, aggressive. But none of that happened. Instead, Shaq had let him stay. Let him sit in meetings, walk the halls, answer calls, perform his role like nothing had changed. But everything had. Over the course of the next week, the Westbridge Hotel transformed in ways subtle and profound. Lena had taken over the general manager's office the following morning. Not by announcement, but by action. She walked into the room, cleaned the desk, sorted the files, reviewed the vendor contracts, and by noon was already interviewing candidates to replace Kayla and Javier, the 2 staff members Trevor had fired without cause. Her promotion had come with a handwritten note, left on the keyboard. "You've always run this place. Now it's official." She didn't cry when she read it. She just sat down, adjusted the chair, and went to work. Jace didn't come in the next morning. His shift had been cleared from the schedule. In his locker, he found an envelope with a gold seal embossed with the letters NBE. Inside were 3 pages, a personalized scholarship offer, a copy of tuition guarantees for 4 years at Georgia State, and a note in blocky handwriting that read, "Keep recording truth, but leave it first." He folded the letter slowly, holding it like it might disappear. Then he walked outside into the sunlight, breathing in the city like it was brand new. Trevor watched it all, from a distance. He tried to resume his role, tried to walk the lobby with posture and poise, but the staff moved around him now, not with fear but indifference. Conversations paused when he entered rooms. No more side glances for permission. No more check-ins before decisions were made. He still had a title, still had a badge, but no one deferred to it anymore. He stopped speaking in meetings. He stopped holding meetings altogether. By midweek, he found himself taking calls in the garden lounge, pretending to be busy, scheduling dinners no one would attend. He wandered the halls like a man who had once been mayor of a town that no longer needed governing. On Thursday morning, a courier arrived in a black polo, carrying a small, flat envelope. No flash, no folder, no briefcase. Just one name, Trevor Langston. Trevor accepted it with a faint nod. He already knew what it was. He waited until he was alone, sitting at the desk he hadn't used since Lena took over. Then opened it. There was no letterhead, no logo, just 2 sheets of white paper, printed in crisp black ink. Effective immediately, Trevor Langston's position as general manager of Westbridge Hotel is hereby concluded. All final payments, including severance and benefits, have been arranged as per contractual agreement. This decision reflects our commitment to establishing a culture rooted in dignity, equality, and leadership that aligns with the values of Northbridge Equity and its managing partners. There was no signature, just a small handwritten note at the bottom of the second page. Not because of one night, because of every day before it. Trevor folded the letter neatly, laid it on the desk, and stared at it for a long while. He didn't slam doors, didn't storm out, just walked slowly out the side entrance. No one followed. No one stopped him. It wasn't exile. It was release. Back inside, life bloomed in quiet ways. Lena called an all-staff meeting in the Magnolia Room, the same space Trevor had used for his tone-deaf diversity training. This time the projector was off. There were no slides, just chairs, and a circle. She stood at the center, nerves dancing at her fingertips, but her voice was firm. "We're not perfect," she began, "but we're not what we used to be, and that's a good thing." Heads nodded. Emerson leaned against the wall with arms crossed, smirking proudly. Tommy, freshly named facilities director, sat with a clipboard in hand, already taking inventory of things that needed fixing, not just in the building but in the way it ran. "We have an opportunity," Lena continued, "to make this hotel feel like it belongs to everyone who walks through that door. And it starts with how we treat each other, not just the guests." Emerson raised a hand. "Long as the kitchen keeps its budget, you got my vote." Laughter broke out. The mood lifted. Change wasn't coming. It was here. Shaq didn't attend the meeting. He was already gone that day, back to another city, another building with its own ghosts to confront. But he left behind a small silver plaque, delivered the following afternoon, and mounted in the hotel's entry hall. It read, "Founded 1874. Restored. Luxury doesn't require exclusion. Hospitality begins with dignity." No mention of his name. Just a message. In room 305, now renamed the Lucille Suite. The Bible still sat in the drawer, but next to it was a new guest book. And the first page read, "To those who were told they didn't belong, welcome home." It didn't take long for word to spread. Within a month, guests returned with new eyes. Reviews changed. Locals who had once felt invisible began booking rooms for special occasions. Family reunions, weddings. A jazz trio played on Friday nights in the atrium. The same sax player who used to play near Whitaker Street, now given the prime seat under the chandelier. The Westbridge didn't become perfect, but it became something better. As for Trevor, no one really knew where he went. Some said he moved to Atlanta, others said he went back north. But wherever he landed, one thing was certain: he would never forget the day he watched his own power dissolve in the face of quiet, relentless grace. Shaq hadn't shouted. He hadn't humiliated. He'd simply let him stay long enough to see what leadership really looked like. And then, with steady hands, he'd written the final line on a story that had gone too long without an ending. Room 305, once tucked away and labeled under maintenance, had been renovated not with luxury, but with legacy in mind. The heavy blackout curtains were replaced with soft linen drapes that let morning light pour in. A framed photo of Lucille O'Neill sat on the side table, her smile wide, her posture straight, her eyes full of something more powerful than confidence, resilience. Under the picture, a small placard read, "The Lucille Suite, dedicated to the woman who taught grace without spectacle, and strength without noise." A second guest book now sat on the writing desk. Not just for names and dates, but for stories. Guests were encouraged to write something about where they came from, what they carried, why they chose to stay here. The pages filled quickly. Mothers, veterans, teachers, young couples from Harlem celebrating anniversaries, Single dads from Alabama stopping for the weekend with their kids. Each story different, but bound by a thread of belonging. Shaq didn't visit often, but when he did, he never stayed in the penthouse. He always stayed in room 305. Sometimes just for a night, sometimes for a long weekend. When Savannah felt quiet, and he needed to remind himself why he did what he did. He never announced his visits. He'd arrive in jeans, a hoodie, and sneakers that no longer surprised the front desk team. They knew, and they let him move the way he liked. Quiet, low-key, present. He had dinner in the kitchen with Emerson when he came. Not in the dining hall, but in the back, at the prep table, where they talked about more than menus, about how the staff was growing, about how Lena was thriving, about Jace, who had started college with a journalism major, and a new camera. Emerson would feed him, listen, and sometimes just sit beside him in silence. On Sundays, Shaq liked to walk to the church 2 blocks over. The same one his mother would have loved. He'd sit in the back, head bowed, hands together, listening without needing to be seen. After service, he'd stop by the cafe next door. The owner always had his table ready. He never charged him, not because he was famous, but because of what he'd done. One afternoon in late fall, as the weather cooled and the magnolias began to thin their leaves, a young woman named Mia checked into the hotel with her 9-year-old son, Carter. She was escaping something. The front desk didn't ask what. Her voice shook slightly when she handed over her ID, and her eyes darted like she was afraid of being turned away. Lena noticed. She'd seen that look before. She asked quietly, "Do you need somewhere peaceful tonight?" Mia nodded. Lena handed her the key to room. That night, Mia wrote a letter in the guest book. A thank you, a confession, a declaration that for the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe. Her son slept through the night, without waking up crying, and she promised herself they'd come back, not just to stay, but to live. Word of the Lucille suite spread, but never as advertisement. The hotel never ran an ad campaign. They didn't need to. People talked. Stories passed from cousin to cousin, friend to friend. A place where dignity met design, where your name didn't have to carry weight to be welcomed like royalty. The community changed, too. Vendors who once felt priced out by Westbridge's elitism were now working with the hotel directly. Local artists had their work hung in the hallways. The Friday night jazz sessions featured kids from the nearby youth music program. Emerson helped launch a culinary apprenticeship in the basement kitchen, teaching neighborhood teens how to fillet fish and plate soul food with elegance. But perhaps the most powerful change of all was in the staff themselves. Lena's leadership was quiet, but commanding. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't chase recognition. But under her guidance, staff retention climbed. Guest satisfaction doubled, and the staff meetings that used to be tense and mandatory were now open circles where voices were heard. Lena didn't sit at the head of the table. She sat with them. Tommy, no longer hiding behind mop buckets and forgotten hallways, wore a facilities badge with pride. He trained new hires, taught them about systems older than most of them, and always ended the week with a story from back when elevators ran like tanks. Jace came home for the holidays and visited the hotel on a cold December evening. He walked through the front doors, not with hesitation, but with purpose. He greeted everyone by name, then made his way to the back corridor and found the AV closet, where he'd hidden that HDMI cord all those months ago. It was still there. He left it. A reminder. The next morning, he had breakfast with Shaq in the garden lounge. "You changed a lot," Shaq said. Jace grinned. "So did you." Shaq looked around, the light filtering through the stained glass windows. The sound of a bellhop laughing without fear. The smell of fresh biscuits from the kitchen. "This place," he said quietly, "was never just about the building." Jace nodded. "I know." Shaq leaned back, gaze soft. "You're gonna build your own someday." "Maybe," Jace replied. "But I think you already started something bigger." Shaq smiled. And he had. Because Westbridge wasn't the only hotel. It was the first. There were others. Quietly acquired, quietly transformed. One in Baton Rouge, where a former plantation house had been turned into a wellness retreat for veterans and their families. One in Charlotte, where a once segregated country inn was now a mentorship hub for young Black entrepreneurs. Another in Tulsa, another in Birmingham, each of them carrying a hidden code in their ownership records. NBEESO1. 50 in total. Each one different. Each one designed not to erase the past, but to reclaim it, rebuild it, make it whole again. Shaq never told the media. He never branded it. The only people who knew were the ones who needed to know. Because it wasn't about making noise. It was about making space. Space for the forgotten. The dismissed. The ones who had been told luxury wasn't made for them. Shaq knew better. And so did the Lucille suite. At the end of each month, the hotel printed out one entry from the guest book and framed it in the back hallway. No names, just words. One of them read, "I came here carrying shame. I left with dignity. And that changed everything." Shaq read that one often. Because legacy doesn't live in logos or headlines. It lives in the hearts of people who walk into a space and feel seen. And that kind of hospitality, it doesn't check out at noon. It stays. Long after the guests are gone. If this story made you feel something good, that means you're awake. Because what happened at Westbridge, it still happens, just behind newer curtains. Stick with us. The next door that opens might just be your own. And remember, not all revolutions are loud. Some wear hoodies and walk in quietly.